There are over 100 billion Earth-like planets out there in the Milky Way galaxy, and considering the sheer size of the universe, it's very likely that we aren't alone in this world. However, if any of those extraterrestrial beings wanted to visit us, they'd have to travel through space, which is basically impossible with our current technology. Traveling through space would take thousands of years. This spacecraft had a monkey doll inside of it to test the gravity effects on the body during space travel. The capsule was supposed to stay in orbit for 7 days, but it re-entered the atmosphere after just 3 days. They wanted to beat the Soviet Union, who had set the record for keeping a person in space for 22 days. He spent almost 70 hours in space orbiting the Earth, 22 times before splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean. But this wasn't nearly enough for NASA. They were determined to beat the Soviet Union's record, so they started training a new astronaut for an even bigger mission. At first, NASA thought that 30 days would be a great target to aim for. Just like that, NASA had beaten the Soviet Union and proved that humans could survive in space for extended periods of time. But after conducting several tests, they realized that keeping an astronaut in space for 30 days would be extremely risky. They completed over 160 orbits around the Earth and conducted several experiments. Unfortunately, they ran out of film while taking pictures of the solar eclipse and couldn't capture the event. But luckily, amateur astronomer Philip S. was able to photograph the eclipse and share it with the astronauts. These 3 astronauts became national heroes and were welcomed back to Earth with open arms. If we look at it from a certain perspective, the man who survived 90 years alone in space is the same man who landed on the moon. But if that alien managed to travel faster than light, they could reach Earth within a relatively short amount of time. Now, obviously, traveling faster than light isn't possible according to the laws of physics, but what if I told you that it is? All matter is made up of atoms, which are tiny particles that are constantly moving. This would allow him to travel between the 2 planets in a matter of seconds, despite the immense distance between them. But once he arrived on Earth, he would have faced a different problem. After learning the English language and adapting to human society, he would have to find a way to return to his home planet. The only way to do this would be to build a spaceship that can travel faster than light. The people on Earth wouldn't be able to understand him since he is an alien from a planet 4.2 light years away. Considering the fact that Spock would have to learn the English language, adapt to human society, build a spaceship and then travel faster than light to return to his home planet. Do you believe that aliens exist? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. It's safe to say that he would have spent at least 90 years on Earth. Language barriers would make it difficult for him to communicate with the humans on Earth. And this is essentially the same concept behind the vast majority of sci-fi shows and movies. If we could find a way to control these atoms, then we could theoretically move them from one location to another instantly. This would allow us to teleport matter, including ourselves, from one location to another. Let me explain. As we mentioned earlier, Neil Armstrong was one of the first astronauts to land on the moon. One of the main characters in the show is Spock, who is half human and half Vulcan. Vulcans are an alien race from the planet Vulcan, which is located 14.6 light years away from Earth. According to the show, the Enterprise can travel faster than light, allowing Spock to travel from Vulcan to Earth in a matter of seconds. But what if I told you that Neil Armstrong was actually an alien who came from a planet 4.2 light years away from Earth? Let's call this planet Z. In June of 1965, Ed White became the first American to walk in space. He spent over 20 minutes outside of the spacecraft and performed several experiments. The Apollo missions were the next step in NASA's plan to explore space. The Apollo 11 mission was the first mission to land humans on the moon. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to walk on the moon, while Michael Collins stayed in space and orbited the moon. This paved the way for NASA's next big goal, which was to send 3 astronauts to space for 14 days and have them stay in space for an entire month. They spent about 2 hours on the surface of the moon collecting samples and taking photographs before returning to Earth. Over the course of these missions, 12 astronauts walked on the moon and brought back hundreds of pounds of lunar material. Upon their return, they were greeted with a ticker-tape parade in New York City and were awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So instead, they decided to go for 14 days. To this day, no one knows why the capsule returned to Earth so early. And even if we managed to travel at the speed of light, it would still take 4.2 million years just to get to the nearest star system. And although he didn't break the record set by the Soviets, he did manage to stay in space for almost 4 days, orbiting the Earth 22 times. Carpenter completed several experiments while in space, such as testing the effects of weightlessness on his eyes and measuring the blood pressure in his legs. He also took photos of Earth from space and performed a spacewalk for 21 minutes. His mission was declared a huge success and he became a national hero upon returning home. But what if we could find a way to travel faster than light? On May 1963, Alan Shepard became the first American to spend a day in space. He stayed in space for 5 hours, completing 1 orbit around the Earth before landing in the Atlantic Ocean. Although his time in space was short, he managed to hit a golf ball into space, making him the first person to hit a golf ball outside of the Earth's atmosphere. Today we'll be looking at a man who survived 90 years all by himself in space. So without further ado, Let's begin. On May 1964, John Young became the first person to spend 14 days in space. He completed over 100 orbits around the Earth and conducted several experiments. Although he spent 14 days straight in space, he only spent 10 days in the spacecraft. That's because the spacecraft was undocked twice for 2 days, each time so that other astronauts could enter the space station. In the early 1960s, NASA conducted several space experiments where they sent animals into space to see how they would react. Most of these experiments were conducted with monkeys and dogs because they are mammals like humans. And unfortunately, most of these tests ended up being fatal for the animals. In December of 1961, NASA sent a dog named Strelka into space and left her in orbit for 4 days. After returning to Earth, Strelka gave birth to 6 puppies, but sadly, 2 of them died soon after birth and another 2 died a few weeks later. It was found that the reason for their death was a malfunction in their cardiovascular system. On January of 1962, realizing that sending animals into space wasn't safe, NASA decided to send an unmanned spacecraft called the Mercury 6 into space. After this incident, NASA decided to put their astronaut program on hold until they figured out a way to keep a human alive in space for an extended period. And that's when John Glenn became the first American to be sent into space. He stayed in space for almost 5 hours and successfully orbited the Earth 3 times before returning home safely. This was a huge success for NASA. But now they needed to figure out how to keep an astronaut in space for much longer. On February 1962, Gus Grissom became the second American to be sent into space. Scott Carpenter was the third American to be sent into space. Now NASA was ready to send an astronaut to space for an extended period. Shepard's mission was a stepping stone for the real deal, which was sending an astronaut into space for 14 days. After spending 14 days in space, Young was brought back to Earth and splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean. But little did they know that this was just the beginning. On March 1965, Gus Grissom, John Young, and John C. became the first astronauts to spend an entire month in space. This was just the beginning, and although this was an incredible achievement, it was nothing compared to what came next. As Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon, he famously said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The Apollo missions continued until 1972 with the last mission, Apollo 17, landing on the moon in December of that year. Now, you might be thinking this has nothing to do with the question, but it actually does. Considering the fact that it takes 4.2 million years to travel 4.2 light years at the speed of light, it would take an extremely long time for an alien from Zargon to reach Earth. In the TV show Star Trek, the main character, Captain James Tiberius Kirk, travels through space with his spaceship called the Enterprise. Spock is often seen using a type of transporter, which is a device that can instantly transport matter from one location to another. If we were to apply the technology used in the transporter to Spock's situation, he could simply be disassembled on Vulcan and reassembled on Earth. Neil Armstrong, or should I say Spock, would have been able to travel from Zargon to Earth in a matter of seconds using this technology. So he would have to find a way to learn the English language and adapt to human society. But building a spaceship that can travel faster than light would be extremely difficult considering the advanced technology needed to do so. And thus, the man who survived 90 years alone in space is the same man who landed on the moon.